Let's see. How many of us have these in your pocket? Keep it on. I want the NSA and the president to hear everything I'm telling you. All right, two more serious trials of guilt or innocence, and to my topic, which is the natural law. When Thomas More had his last opportunity to address something for posterity and knew that his effort would be futile, he was defending himself in his trial for treason. So he's the defendant and the lawyer. The alleged and proven act of treason was silence. The refusal to assert affirmatively and in writing that the king was the head of the church on earth. He made the following argument to the jury. Now, he knew the jury had been handpicked by the king's judges, and the king's judges had been handpicked by the king. He knew that he was going to lose this. He knew he was going to be found guilty. He knew he would be executed, and the execution method was beheading. Some men say the earth is round, and some men say it is flat. But if it is flat, could the king's command make it round? And if it is round, could an act of parliament make it flat? Now, when he was making that argument, he, of course, was not only appealing to the jurors' common sense. Of course, the king couldn't make a flat earth round, and of course, the parliament couldn't make a round earth flat. He was appealing to their understanding of the laws of nature that restrain even the government at the time. Henry VIII, who was about to have him beheaded, and the parliament, which was the facilitator in his beheading. So his choice between remaining mute at his trial and being convicted, or taking a stand for something as affirmative as the limitations on the government, he exercised that choice by giving this now classic statement of the natural law. Fast forward to the present day. When Moore said that, this was not a novel argument. He is not the originator of the argument of the natural law. The modern day, it's 800 years ago, but the modern day originator is St. Thomas Aquinas, still the best explainer of the natural law. But John Locke picked up on this, and Thomas Jefferson picked up on it when he wrote the Declaration of Independence, and James Madison picked up on it when he was the scrivener for the Constitution. Jefferson's version of Moore's phrase is this: we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay, so can you tell me a little bit more about natural law? And just kind of give me an idea of how you came to understand this, kind of the genesis of this.
Well, I mean, how I came to understand it is really through enormous suffering and doing the opposite of aligning myself and my behaviors with natural law, and understanding that I was only going to get more suffering that way. I highly recommend not going down that path. I wish that humanity wouldn't choose to go down that path. It seems that collectively humanity is choosing to take that direction. I speak out about this topic and try to explain how this works to people, because I don't want to see humanity continue to go down that path of suffering that it seems to be taking in the unconscious state that it is in right now, collectively. So that's really what helped me to understand it. I was living a life that was completely out of balance and was not in harmony with these laws of behavior, because that's what natural law ultimately governs. See, it can be a difficult thing for people to accept natural law, particularly if they're of a very imbalanced worldview. So there's an imbalanced worldview toward randomness, or the fact that the idea that there is no a governing dynamic regarding behavior in the universe. In other words, everything else could be governed by law. All the physical matter could be governed by physical laws, but consciousness has no boundary conditions and has no governing dynamics that is in place that governs it. And this is often, part of a worldview that doesn't take consciousness into consideration at all. Mm-hmm. So what natural law actually is governing dynamics which act as boundary conditions in nature, and what they are governing is the consequences of our free will choices. So again, many people don't want to understand this because they want to think that we can do whatever we want and act without consequence, and there's no force in nature that is actually bringing to us the results of what we have chosen through our free will. You know, and another part of it is people often don't want to understand natural law because they don't want the responsibility that goes with it, or they don't want to look at the universe in a certain way. They want to see it as either completely random or as some sort of a caring being that is directly involved in their life in some way, in such a form, let's say, that it anthropomorphizes the universe and makes it have the characteristics or the qualities of the human being with the emotional dynamics that go along with the human being. When you tell people on either side of the fence when it comes to this, the randomness idea that there's no purpose to the universe and that, you know, there's no governing dynamics when it comes to consciousness, because they often believe consciousness doesn't exist. Then you have many people on the other side that, you know, look at the creation or the creator as something that is directly involved in people's lives and cares about them in a personal sense. I think both of these are sort of worldviews that will not help people to understand what natural law is.
So if Jefferson's correct, if this isn't just some musing, and by the way, the Declaration of Independence is a statute enacted by the Congress. If you go to the first book of the U.S. Code and go to the first page, you'll see there the Declaration of Independence. Probably the most violated statute by the government that we have, even though it's the first and the oldest. But it articulates the view that our rights come from our humanity. What are these rights that come from our humanity? And if they come from our humanity, how can the government trample them? Well, the concept of natural rights articulated by Aquinas is this, that there are areas of human behavior for which we do not need a government permission slip in order to make free choices in those areas. So things like the freedom to develop your personality. I told O'Reilly he should be grateful for that freedom. The freedom to develop your personality, the right to think as you wish, the right to say what you think, the right to publish your thoughts, the right to worship or not to worship, the right to assemble in groups, the right to refuse to assemble in groups, the right to petition the government for a redress of your differences, the right to defend yourself. I must tell you, the right to defend yourself, the right to keep and bear arms, does not protect your right to shoot deer. It protects your right to shoot at the government when it is taken over by tyrants. These are the quintessential American right. I'm going down the Bill of Rights. The quintessential American right. The right to be left alone. Codified in the Fourth Amendment. Today called the right to privacy. Codified in the Fourth Amendment. We all know what has happened to privacy. Let's see. How many of us have these in your pocket? Keep it on. I want the NSA and the president to hear everything I'm telling you.
Because natural law works like the conditions that govern a computer. And again, many people will hear this and they will hear that I'm, to them it will sound like I'm saying that the universe is a computer. I'm not saying it is a computer. I'm saying that it behaves with certain functions like a computer, in such that if we put certain things into it, the outcome is going to be guaranteed in a certain way. If you're sitting down at a computer and you're writing certain code, okay, and you're compiling that code and you're building a program, that program is always going to behave according to the conditions that you entered into it. So if you put good code into the program, the manifestation on the screen when you execute the program, when you run it, is going to be as expected. It's going to be efficient. It's going to do what you want it to do. If, however, what you put into it is flawed in some way and you have bugs and errors in your coding, the output that you're going to get on the screen is not going to be what you want. It's going to manifest something that is chaotic in some way, and it's going to put out bad output. Well, this is how the universe works. The universe works like that computer. That computer doesn't really care about whether you didn't understand what you were coding. It doesn't care. It just puts out on the screen what you put into it. That's it.
Yes.
So in a way, that's what natural law is like. And again, that's why it's difficult for many people to accept that this is how our universe works. They don't, on both sides, again, of the fence, a left brain side and a right brain side, people don't want to accept it because those of the left brain bent don't even want to acknowledge that it exists. So those of a right brain bent want to think that it is something that is caring, and it is looking at all the factors about why we chose what we chose. All it does is bring the result. That's all this governing dynamic is put into creation to do. Let me give an example, and I think it might clarify it a little bit. If a child, let's say a toddler of 1.5 to 2 years old who, you know, or even earlier, maybe a 1-year-old who just started learning to walk, okay, is moving toward the edge of a cliff. They're walking and they're moving toward, let's say the family was out hiking or picnicking out in out in nature someplace, and the child broke away from the parents momentarily, and the parents were distracted, and the child's moving toward a cliff. It's a terrible situation to even contemplate, but just humor me for a moment.
Sure.
If the child did happen to undertake the action of moving too close to that edge and it slipped off and went over the edge, God forbid, okay? But if that happened, would the universe care about whether the child didn't understand gravity?
No.
It would simply still be bound according to the conditions that are in effect in nature. Now, that wouldn't mean, if we ask the question, right, does that mean that the universe hates that child? Or does that mean that the universe loves that child? Neither one of those questions would even make much sense. It simply is a law that exists in nature, and it's non-personal. Gravity is a physical law that exists in nature that is non-personal. It doesn't make a difference whether the being who is moving toward the edge of that cliff on Earth, where there's a 1G condition in place, understands gravity or not. It wouldn't make a difference whether the person was 90 years old and had lived a full life and had understood the laws of physics and mechanics in their lifetime, or whether they were 1-year-old and haven't even developed language skills yet.
I started by saying keep it on. Here's the sad thing. It doesn't have to be on for them to listen to us. When I used to say this about BlackBerries and iPhones a couple of years ago, people would say, oh, there he goes again. He's off his meds. He's hanging out with Lou Rockwell too much. But today we all know this is true. Today we know that our popularly elected government has such profound disregard for our natural rights that it tramples them to extremes beyond which even George Orwell could have imagined in 1984. Without getting into the NSA, another topic for another time. If Aquinas was right, and if Jefferson was right, and these rights come from our humanity and not from the government, things like thought and speech and privacy and travel, how can the government trample them? Well, the theory of our government is that we have surrendered some of our rights to the government so that the government will protect the rights that we have not surrendered. That's the idea of the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed. Does anyone in this room know anyone now living who consented to the government? Well, the answer is no. It's inconceivable that anybody still living was around when the Constitution was enacted and consented to it. So right off the bat, the idea that the government derives its powers from the consent of the governed is like government itself, a fiction. The fiction is that we have consented to the surrender of our rights. The reality is that our rights have been stolen from us because the government monopolizes force. It's a sad and terrible reality, but it is reality. In theory, when the Constitution was enacted, and there's a typo in the Constitution, I get in trouble for saying this, the third word is wrong. It says, we the people. Of course, the Constitution was not enacted by the people, it was enacted by the states. But that was never corrected. Nevertheless, whatever surrendered to the federal government was limited to 16 discrete, unique, separate, stated, articulated powers in the Constitution. And then the Ninth Amendment says, just because we've listed a bunch of rights in the first 8 doesn't mean that others. There are many others. It would be impossible for us to list them all.